Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Parting the Veil Live. I am your host, Minus, and with me, as always, is our... Oh, there we go. So Twitch just messed me up. I feel like David is here in spirit, Chris, because Twitch was muted, and then it unmuted as I was talking. You guys got multiple minus. So anyway, as always, our creative director, Chris Joppa Perkins, is with me, and I'm going to refer to you now a lot as Mr. Perkins. So welcome to the show, Mr. Perkins.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here. This is episode 3. I'm excited.
Yeah, very excited. And today we're actually going to sort of dig back to some of the early days of Pantheon, something we've talked about. It's been present in streams, but not really defined the way it was defined, I think, when Pantheon sort of started building itself, which is called the Pantheon Difference. So Chris, let's jump right into it. We have a lot we want to talk through tonight. So let's get started by talking about what the Pantheon Difference was originally defined as. So I'd like to eventually go through, where it's stated before. But first, could you kind of tell me on a high level what these Pantheon differences really mean, like what they mean to you, what they mean to the game, and sort of how we originally started with this path?
Yeah. Well, so traditionally, we've referred to these as our tenets. And these are the core beliefs, the design principles, and I guess really the goals that shape what we're creating with Pantheon. So when we coined the phrase the Pantheon Difference, we were wanting to encapsulate the way these tenets are designed to ultimately create a unique game experience that sets itself apart in very meaningful ways. So in other words, what are the things about Pantheon that make it importantly distinct? That's what we mean by the Pantheon Difference.
And that's important too, because I think the very first episode of Parting the Veil we did, which wasn't in this live format, we kind of talked about that we weren't just going to be a clone, that we weren't just going to be, the version of what some people thought we were. Like, we were going to stand on our own 2 feet. And these were a big part of what were leading us to this gameplay experience that we wanted to obviously grab the core spirit of, but then make our own and evolve. So it's pretty important for those out there that are like, what is Pantheon? So let's get into it. Now, I'm starting with sort of the old Pantheon differences. I say old, so some people out there know, obviously, that foreshadowing, some of these things have changed. But right now, if you go to the Pantheon website, when you search Pantheon Difference, it actually takes you to the Pantheon Wiki. And the Wiki list defines the following items as the Pantheon Difference. So I'm going to go through these real quick, and then maybe we'll touch on them one by one. So first, they listed the atmosphere/climate systems. They list the Living Codex, dynamic NPC encounter groups, NPC dispositions and behaviors, the perception system, the colored mana system, the progeny system, and situational gear. So a lot to unpack right there. So and I think it's important that we say too, Chris, that this episode of Parting the Veil is probably going to pave the way for some very deep discussions around some of these topics when we kick off Parting the Veil Live starting in January again, right? So these are going to fundamentally be probably episode topics we're going to get a lot more in depth. So today we're going to cover them from a high level perspective. So let's do this. Let's go through these items. I'll kind of queue them up for you. Let me know if it's still part of the Pantheon Difference, if there's any update to the category since it was previously announced, or if it's been removed. And like I said, feel free to go into as much as you'd like. But again, we'll be going more in depth on these topics in the future. So one of my favorites is the atmosphere and climate systems, that as it's listed in the wiki. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that category and where it stands today?
Sure. First of all, we're getting into a pattern here where you'll ask me a question and then I'll want to say something in response to what you just said. So let me just make a quick point,
please,
because I think it's important to clarify that what we're talking about today, wherever you happen to be, are the designs that have been birthed, if you will, and are being guided by the tenets, by the core beliefs, by the core goals of what we are aiming to create. And so when Minus mentioned the fact that some of these have changed, the tenets have not changed, the core principles and beliefs have not changed.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the designs that we are planning on incorporating into Pantheon have changed, over the past however many years it is since we've taken a holistic look at these. But the tenets, the core beliefs, the groundwork, the bedrock of what Pantheon is and why Pantheon is has not changed. So I just want to make that very, very clear. Okay, so atmospheres and climate systems. The first thing right off the bat, this one has stayed relatively consistent in terms of our goals for the system and our plans for it. But we've renamed it. We've renamed atmospheres to fractures. So this really should be fractures and climates. We decided that atmosphere and climate tended to run a little just too closely thematically and even in just definition. So we ultimately decided on fractures. But the cool thing about it, what I love about fractures as the word, is that it captures the reality behind the system and the mechanics really well. Essentially, a fracture is a tear or a disruption in the various manas and energies that make up, the unseen fabric of Terminus. And these energies and manas, when they come together in a discordant way, is when you see fractures form. And this is often caused by or seeded by to manifest later by the collision events that occur on the planet. And you can imagine, you've got these very different realms and worlds with their own unique energies and manas and essences and life forms and to speak to some of the metaphysical aspects of it, not obviously to mention the physical natural aspects of it. And these abrupt violent collisions and minglings can create these very disruptive events called fractures. And those fracture points that are created or that over time appear, those varying discordant energies create these very bizarre and interesting effects in that general area around the fracture. And that's where the concept of our fracture system comes from. And so, I've always kind of described it as climates. Extreme climates in Pantheon are the natural phenomenon that you would expect. Frigid, toxic, you go deep underwater, you're in a pressure climate, an anaerobic climate, things like that. The fractures are our vehicle for creating very eclectic, very interesting, surprising, unique effects. And I think we talked about it on the last episode a little bit, how we're planning to, weave the itemization system into that, weave some of the abilities and skills into that to create, answers that players can come up with for dealing with some of these very unnatural effects that you will find associated with fractures.
And to kind of give an idea of the difference, like just from a system standpoint, we have, climate is something like frigid, where it's very cold and you're literally, your heart's slowing and you're getting hypothermia potentially, and you need to be ready for it. Versus something like you mentioned previously is like the darkness that is just beyond darkness, right? That like magical advanced darkness. Yeah. Where like, your torch all of a sudden doesn't give you light. You need something special. So that's sort of the difference of what's natural in our world, so to speak, versus like these created events, like because of, whatever may do it. So, awesome. I mean, in even well before I joined the team, my excitement for these two systems has always been very high. And I think the first time I got to experience it, we even got to put that on a video where that frigid took over the screen. And it was just like, I think everybody in the group at that time just like gasped, like, what is this? Yeah. So excellent to hear.
Yeah, we want it to be immersive. We want it to be a pretty impactful experience. So like, even in that kind of, early expression of the frigid climate, the screen kind of fogging up a little bit, the kind of fingers and tendrils of frost like starting to appear around the edges of the screen. We want there to be somewhat of a cinematic kind of experience to that. My favorite one is, pressure, when you're I mean, for people who have thalassophobia, I kind of do a little bit. But it's very triggering when you're in the kind of like the dark, deep depths, and you just start seeing hearing those little like tings and cracks of the glass around your screen as it starts to kind of, the pressure starts to build, and that sense of like intensity is rising as more of the screen cracks, and it's kind of very, hopefully the goal is to make that very immersive. So, and we plan to do that with all of them as best we can.
That's awesome. Now, this is going to take us into our first community question here. Now, this is from Kyle Schultz from our YouTube channel. So, speaking to these environmental challenges, as they defined it, they were curious if there's going to be just sort of a one solution to get through this, or will there be sort of multiple ways to overcome these different things in the world?
Yeah, it'll definitely be a mixture. I would say you'll find it more consistently that there's at least a few options to tackle a particular fracture or a climate, or some kind of environmental obstacle like that, and degrees of mitigative effectiveness there too. So I mean, there's multiple options, but there might be one option that's really robust, and then a handful of others that provide some degree of protection or mitigation, but maybe need to be combined with others from other players, or you're just kind of having to get by as best you can with it. But then we also, in some cases, we want to dial the knob like all the way up and ask players to find that supremely specific answer to fit that very specific environmental keyhole. So but you can expect a mixture.
That's awesome. And if you don't mind me even going back to sort of not only like different ways to overcome it or options, but you're going to have to make decisions sometimes, because you've talked in the past about getting into a climate, for example, where it might contain two different climates, and you may have to decide which one you want to bolster yourself against while potentially suffering the effects of the other, depending on your party makeup, what makes sense. And so even in cases where there might be these instances, you're still going to have to make decisions even, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. I mean, underwater is a great example. You've got an anaerobic and a pressure climate together. And, it's also a good example of, very little margin of error, I guess you could say, in terms of the mitigative quality of both of those. So in other words, like, you may be adequately acclimated to anaerobic enough to be where you are under the water, or to stay as long as you need to stay. But if you don't have enough pressure acclimation, it's going to literally limit your ability to go deeper beyond a certain point, lest you die. And so the cool thing about the climate system is, and we're talking about climates here specifically when we're thinking about acclimation and some of that, being able to defend yourself and kind of acclimate to those areas. But the cool thing is how we can really dial those knobs up. So if we want an area to be accessible but burdened by lower amounts of acclimation, we can create that. Hangor is a great example. Where you have a frigid environment, but it's a low enough tier of a frigid environment that you can exist there with some burden without being fully acclimated to that point. Whereas we will absolutely launch Pantheon with without, I don't know that we'll have a tier 5 climate anywhere at launch. There's so much headroom that we have to really grow into that. If we do, it'll obviously be a carrot on a stick for sure. But it's not only just how intense and potent the tiers are, it's also, like you're saying, that the combination of climates as well. So if you've got a volcanic crater and you're dealing with scorching and toxic climates together, and perhaps even anaerobic to some degree, to coincide with the toxicity, then you've got 2 to 3 different climates combined together. And then the decision on how you acclimate to that, where you allocate that acclimation, and what effects you ultimately choose to weather versus mitigate, is all going to be very much part of the puzzle.
Awesome. We could talk forever about climates.
I don't want to be long-winded though.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go ahead and we'll go to the next point. So the next bullet point on that list was the Living Codex. So give us a little bit of information about this, where we stand with it, and sort of what maybe it was a little bit, even for people who might not know.
Yeah. This one needs to be taken off the list. This was a design I put together a long time ago when exploring how to incorporate potentially a colored mana system into the abilities themselves, specifically using the spellbook as a kind of medium or a vehicle to where you could add signets, brands, and I think seals, like three different types of enchantments essentially that you could add to augment their effects, to change the color of mana they were associated with, and other things. So we've since kind of deprecated that idea, that approach. But for those old school enough to remember, this particular design dates back to the days when we had relics that would actually fill up with a color of mana depending on what mana climate you were in at the time. I think the stream we did in 2016-ish had that going on. But yeah, that is no longer a planned system.
All right. So the next one is listed as dynamic NPC encounter groups. So what can players expect from these?
So I'm not exactly sure why we worded it this way.
I love it though. I love that we're just like, yeah, hey, like think it back.
Some wordsmithing we can do on this one. But essentially, this is our NPC combat awareness or our NPC combat tactics system, which is an absolute pillar of Pantheon's gameplay. When we talk about the Pantheon Difference, when we talk about the things that are really going to differentiate this game, the NPC combat awareness and combat tactics is a major piece of that. And if you're curious about it in more detail, we did a stream on this topic and we did accompanying gameplay with it. I think it was back in June or July of last year. And I'd encourage you to check it out. But essentially, this is the layer of NPC AI, conditional logic, encounter design that allows our NPCs to much more effectively and interestingly and consistently respond to what players and other NPCs are doing in combat. It's part of the bedrock of what will make Pantheon a truly challenging game, where we decide to really ramp that up and how finely and acutely we dial that, and make it a more tactical experience. When you've got an NPC that is able to recognize when one of its allies is mesmerized and break that NPC out of the mesmerization, or NPCs that know how to damage themselves to amplify a certain effect or to mitigate a certain effect. When you've got NPCs that can recognize, what race or what class or what abilities are being used and can respond, to those things accordingly, and even leverage those things to their advantage. These are the kind of things that, if dialed too high across the board, then the game becomes mechanical and inaccessible. But the right amount just creates a very tactical experience that I think is really going to set us apart.
Yeah, I think that was when you guys were with Sleepless, I believe, in the Sleepless area, kind of showing off up there. And it's just funny to me to think about all the enchanters out there that have to be careful about, an enemy breaking a mez that you put down. And I think we even showed how you could get them out of line of sight. So if you could keep them out of line of sight, they won't be able to break it, right? From their position and such. So a lot of neat things we saw there, and I'm sure a lot more to come. So it's awesome. So where are we currently with dispositions and behaviors? That ties a lot into what you were just talking about, but it's definitely a different element. So how does this make Pantheon stand out from, some of the other combat or MMORPG experiences out there?
Yeah, well, this one fits really well with the one we just covered. It is an additional layer and also another very big one, a very important one. I would say an absolute pillar of making Pantheon distinctly Pantheon. So dispositions, on a high level, dispositions is our answer to the Groundhog Day syndrome of MMOs, where invariably they just find themselves in, because no matter how exciting a new area is, a new dungeon, whatever it is, the first time that you go there, or the first 5 times, the first 10 times, it's great, it's exciting, it's fresh, it's new, but inevitably it becomes rote, it becomes repetitive, as you know exactly what to expect around every corner. And so now, something I think that has exacerbated that is the onset and kind of widespread adoption of instance linear dungeon design, or dungeon runs, because there's very little, if any, emphasis on exploration. It has kind of an innate start and finish line, and you're really just sharpening the roteness by literally completing the experience. That the act of completing the experience,
and it's more time based,
over and over again.
Right? Like how much quicker can I do it? It's not about how much can I get done, right? Yeah.
That's how you can kind of like lean into it a little bit and try and get some additional enjoyment out of it, is by, pacing and trying to push, the speed. And I have to say, something like, I think the power inherent in something like the disposition system, even in kind of a light treatment of it, would be like a Mythic Plus in WoW, where you do have kind of those cyclical changing of the different traits and behaviors or whatnot that the NPCs have, but it's still within the context of that instance linear experience. We just think it's far more compelling and promotes more ongoing freshness.
Yeah, that's good.
To promote existing in an area instead of running through it in a linear fashion. Existing in an area, probing its extents, probing its depths, that's just going to keep something perpetually more interesting, especially, as we lean on that Metroidvania kind of inspiration, where we want there to be so many facets and levels of these areas that you are able to unlock and gain access to over time. But beyond this, going back to the disposition system, it's an AI layer that governs the unique ways in which an NPC will approach combat, depending on what disposition they spawn with. And I emphasize behavioral purposely because to push it beyond the traditional chance that NPCs can spawn with varying stats. Like, we're all very familiar with the fact that NPCs can spawn with, higher strength or more health or more resistances, things like that. Some of those characteristics could very well be folded into our dispositions, or more likely our trait system. But there's that behavioral layer specifically that makes dispositions unique. And because dispositions will cause NPCs that spawn with them to actually behave differently, respond differently, have different goals, etc. So we've traditionally used pyrophobic as a clear and easy example. Areas where NPCs have a chance to spawn with that disposition of just being afraid of fire. And so what that means for your fire spells, what that means for your torches, things like that, to go into an area you've been into, many times before, and all of a sudden there's a pyrophobic enemy right, that happened to spawn right in the middle of everything. And if we bring fire to bear here, then this thing's going to take off running and we're going to be overwhelmed. Like that changes the moment. It changes the experience. And all of a sudden, in something you've done many times before, you now have to start thinking strategically differently about how to approach it. Another example that I don't think we've actually talked about publicly is something new. The dark foe disposition. And an NPC that spawns with the dark foe disposition will prioritize attacking light sources, trying to snuff them out, and will actually gain damage bonuses in darkness. So another example of the kind of behavioral layers that this disposition system will provide, and what that means for keeping areas fresh. But okay, so with this one too, I'd update the title. So instead of dispositions and behaviors, we would update it to dispositions and traits, because the trait system, this is something that we actually incorporated into this overall design more recently. Traits are not behavioral. Instead, they represent innate characteristics that modify an NPC's stats in a special way, usually to make them more uniquely effective in combat. So some traits may also interact with certain dispositions, which is neat when you see like an NPC spawning with a disposition and a trait that happen to kind of complement or coincide with each other. And yes, NPCs can spawn with both. NPCs will have a chance to spawn with different dispositions, to spawn with different traits, and can spawn with a combination of both. And a few examples of traits would be mana starved, which a mana starved trait will cause that NPC's attacks to drain mana. Another one would be radiant. A radiant trait emits a magical light in a radius around the target, which can actually break stealth, can interrupt invisibility effects and things like that. So those are some examples of what traits will look like. But the bottom line here is that with the different dispositions and traits that NPCs will be capable of spawning with, the goal is to keep content in Pantheon fresher for longer. We want to just to ensure that fewer visits to the same area will play out the same way.
Love it. And I think it's sharing a little insider note. There was people have heard of Bloodthirsty. We've talked about that a bit. And even that they were so bloodthirsty that just until recently they were attacking GMs in invisible mode. So
that's right.
Little fun inside moment there, but that was fixed. So next up is a big one, the perception system. Now we've shown this off in streams. For those that didn't partake in some of our pre-alpha testing sessions, you actually could go through sort of the beginning feel of like perception, which was kind of neat. So what do you have? How does this play into the Pantheon difference, and where are we at with this? And what would you tell people about this system?
So perception is about differentiation really at its heart. The idea was born literally out of a moment of there's got to be a way to do this differently, more compellingly. And that something that it is hoped to be done differently and more compellingly is delivering story content to the player in a way that breaks away from linear quest hub driven that approach, and instead developing a non-linear, more intentionally immersive system that actually encourages players to explore and rewards them for doing so. That's the key, the give and the take there of encouraging players to explore and then rewarding them for doing so. We take the lore and the story of Pantheon very seriously. For those of you that have been following our development, hopefully that's clear. And knowing that we're going to be doing more deep dives of these systems in the new year, which I just want to reiterate that in a similar way that we did with like the taming system and work through the itemization one as well. We want to give several of these systems we're discussing in a more high level today a much deeper kind of expose, if you will. So I'm not going to go any further into perception than that, because I know out of a lot of these we've talked about it enough that I think a lot of the sentiments are there and clear, and our plans remain the same. What I want to do is just give a quick shout out to some people in our community who do an amazing job of unfolding and exploring different aspects of the lore to the greater community and generally making it more accessible for people to engage with. I think it's worth really calling that out and showing our appreciation for that, because again, the lore and the story, it imbues everything that we're making. It informs and it enriches and it's woven into everything that we're doing. So I'm gonna give a couple of shout outs here, 3 to be specific. Number one is Theric with Pantheon Plus. He does some super compelling work digging into various aspects of Pantheon's lore, making connections, crafting theories, and seeking answers. And I know I personally have enjoyed watching some of those videos that he's done and the Pantheon Plus team have contributed to. So huge shout out to Theric and the Pantheon Plus team. The second one, if you want to hear some amazing narration work, bringing some of the longer stories to life that are lead writer J.N. Gerhardt has pinned. Check out Chris Kane's videos. They're fantastic and very much worth a listen. And I'm jonesing for more. And lastly, number 3, I need to give a shout out to Sir Medieval. I'm not sure I pronounced the first one, but he's recently started putting some higher production value videos together on really highlighting and emphasizing some of the lore of Pantheon, and I'm already hooked. I've really found myself looking forward to watching those. So I think he's new enough at it that I'm not sure how much of the community is aware of it, but definitely check it out. But I think all of these you can find on YouTube. I think that's kind of the main hub. But anyway, the good news is that we want to utilize the perception system to make this amazing story that Pantheon is built upon and around and underneath, and deliver it in the most satisfying, immersive way possible to the player. So I'll leave it at that. Let's keep rolling, Minus.
For sure. Yeah. What did David call him? You would think that I would be the one who called Sir Medieval like Sir Medieval or something, but it was David, if you remember. So I love it.
It was medieval.
Yeah. Maybe.
Something
I mean,
like
listen, maybe David was right. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think so.
So now he's really a part of the community. That's what that means. If you get your name messed up by David or myself, you're in.
There you go.
Next on the list here, the colored mana system is the next bullet point. Now, you kind of talked about this a little bit when you were talking about the Living Codex being sort of out, but the Living Codex sort of lived around this concept. So where does this stand?
This stands firmly in the same place as it did the last time I addressed it, which is we currently don't have active plans for its inclusion, and this one needs to be removed from the list as well. I will say that there are some interesting possibilities with how this could intersect with the crafting sphere, and some fun ideations have been done exploring how different colors of mana could be gathered, could be acquired. So I mean, ultimately, it's something that if we were to pick it up and do something with it, it would absolutely be slated for post-launch.
Okay. The next one has been a hot topic for a long time, and we've addressed it here and there. I think giving an official statement on it is really important, and that's the Progeny system. So do you want to kind of give the official word on where we are with that?
Yeah. What I can say today is that we definitely have plans to include Progeny in Pantheon, but it's highly, again, likely to be something we develop post-launch. As far as specifics, the only thing I'll say on it right now is that one of the elements of Progeny that we're excited to explore is using it as a vehicle for unlocking special race and class combinations. I think it's just best for everyone to kind of absorb that this will 99.5% be a post-launch feature.
Awesome. So staying on that topic, we actually had a question. This is the first. We had a question that I grabbed. I'm going to throw it up on the screen here. But it was asked by two people, pretty much identically. So I kind of just put it together here. But coincidence here by Sir Medieval, and that's SER. And I think I put SIR, maybe. And Disposalist, so Discord and Twitter both. And they kind of were talking about if Progeny is not available, because again, you have kind of brought that up that it's probably going to be post-launch before in our Discord, but this is probably the most officially we've said it. So they asked with mentoring, which was actually brought up on our last live stream. Does this fill a little bit of a gap of what you were hoping for? At least some of the basic elements of Progeny to represent, that being able to start over, get that low level experience in. Just curious if they both wanted to know sort of any details you could provide on it and where it sort of sits for Pantheon and the purpose of it, if it is there mentoring.
I mean, I think to a degree, I think it could be part of filling that gap, but I would still consider them to be two very different systems, because the mentoring system would exist to actually provide the way for that to be a way of experiencing lower level Pantheon content again. Progeny, that aspect of Progeny would be a flavor of, taking a new character through, some of those lower level areas, whereas mentoring is what will allow for that different but absolutely vital ability for higher level players to engage with lower level players in content tailored for lower level players. So I guess all I want to say here is that, mentoring, a system that allows for mentoring, is something we're very serious about. It's kind of a non-negotiable. So
awesome. I love it. So thank you for that update. I think that provides a little clarity, especially with Progeny. I think it's been talked about a lot in our VIP community. I'll tell you that. In Discord, it comes up quite a bit. So the next one on the Pantheon Differences that's listed on the wiki is Situational Gear. So can you discuss this topic a little bit and what it means to like core gameplay at Pantheon? I love the smile before we even get in.
Well, it's so funny because a little off topic, I guess, kind of, but whenever I hear the phrase situational gear, specifically those two words together, it invariably reminds me of my first time sitting across the table from Brad, having a design discussion. And just a little bit of insight into the two of us. Brad, by full self-admission, was a hoarder in MMOs. He loved the acquisition of items and having gear upon gear upon gear, and it was just a facet that he loved. I'm the exact opposite. I don't like having to manage and keep up with tons and tons of gear. In fact, the first time that I played through the Wrath of the Lich King expansion in WoW, when we got to Naxxramas and the final two bosses, the dragon and then the Lich, you needed so much frost gear
Yes, you did.
to survive, and I had to take off all my good stuff to wear all of this frost gear just to survive. And it bothered me because obviously the encounter was balanced and tuned around that being the case. But it's just one example of how I've just never had a huge affinity of it. And I remember that conversation with him so vividly because it was the first like shouting match that he and I got in, because there were these two deep convictions kind of coming to bear. And it's hilarious to me because we ended the time, with a hug, and like everything was great, and it became kind of emblematic for a lot of the sparks and the tension and the things that we would wrestle through. But so anyway, I had to.
That's awesome. No, I love it. I'm sure everyone loves hearing that.
It's such a vivid memory that comes back every time I see those two words together, because I just man, it's fun. So good times. So this is one I think we need to revisit and word differently. On one level, I think it's self-explanatory, kind of like the example I just gave with Naxxramas. It's kind of an MMO constant that you're going to need certain gear to do certain things. Now that can be in most MMOs, it being measured in terms of a system like eye level or item level to determine whether the sum of your gear is sufficient to do the content that you're wanting to do. It could be like the Naxxramas example where you need certain resistances and certain specific gear to protect you from certain specific things. All things that we're very used to. The differentiation in Pantheon is it happens when we start layering in that Metroidvania approach to itemization, specifically in how it relates to exploration, how it relates to moving through the game world and opening up more of the game world to you. So if your goal is to, get to the height of a dizzyingly high mountain, or it's to, get to the in my opinion, the sinister, dark, sinister depths of an ocean trench, which is why I love underwater content so much, because of how much it terrifies me. In Pantheon, there will be gear, there will be skills, there will be abilities that you can acquire that will allow you to get there and to exist there. And that's where I like to emphasize the situational gear component of Pantheon, that it's in so many ways we're trying to not just capture the heart of the combat aspect and the combat experiences of the game, but we're trying to also emphasize the harmonies that go with that melody, if you will, or the large portion of the game that is more than just fighting a target. And in some cases, that gear can be a boon. It can be a benefit. So without giving away too much detail, we've got a couple of areas in one of the dungeons that are dungeon areas that our PA testers are going to be able to dive into soon in the next test. That trying to how to navigate this without. I'll say it like this: having something like the Skyhold Grappler in your arsenal would pretty significantly change your options of how to navigate some of this area. So I would consider that to be a boon, something that is part of the progression, the prestige that you have as a character, where now I have this option, and you can laugh as you whisk away while everyone else has to go the roundabout way. Because in cases like this, you're not actually able to climb to it. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But then there's also areas that will be more of a need, where some of this gear or these skills or abilities will be more of a need. I'm thinking of like the massive rock tors that are, jutting out of the ocean behind Thronefast, where you really will not be able to get to the top of those without being able to glide to them. And so it's fun to think of how long those will sit unexplored. It's fun to think about, who is the first person that will be able to step foot on that area. And so in those cases, we're planning for areas where those special items or abilities or skills will be a true requirement to access an area, not just a convenience or something that opens up more options to you.
So Chris, as soon as you said a dungeon-like area that people will be able to experience with XPA, this chat blew up. They said, go on.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
So we'll leave it at that. Yeah. Everyone's chomping at the bit now. I love it. Okay, so that kind of clears up that original list of items that were kind of made us stand out, that the Pantheon difference that we originally defined. Now, before we get to sort of refining it, kind of summing it up, if you were to create that list now, what topics would you add to it? And can you add some discussion on why that might be on the list?
Yeah. Well, so climbing comes to mind. I think that would be an important one to add, but I wouldn't just put climbing on there any more than I would put swimming or anything else, because it's really what climbing represents. I think the people who glower dubiously at climbing do so because they're really. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't want to assume, but my sense is that they could be only thinking of it as a gimmick, and scrutinizing it as a gimmick, kind of in a vacuum. The point is experiencing it in the context of an open world and an open world MMORPG, where you can literally climb anywhere or nowhere at all. You're not compelled. It is just reality. that's the point. It's the freedom. It's very different from the standard, that's obviously a place I can grab onto and climb, so I guess I'm supposed to go up there. Like that's the gimmick. That's climbing as a gimmick. When everything is climbable, when everything can be climbed, it just exists as a natural option available to you to freely traverse and explore. One of my favorite things to hear from testers is it goes something like, after experiencing climbing in Pantheon, I'm constantly trying to climb things in other games, and I'm disappointed when I remember that I can't. I love hearing that, because to me that communicates the goal, which is kind of the intrinsic experience that the climbing system is the freedom it's meant to bring, and how it kind of conditions you to just expect it, to just expect to be able to move freely. That's what we want it to impart to the player, but not just climbing. We want the same thing with swimming. We want the same thing with, any kind of seafaring travel. We want there to be a very clear sense of, I can just start going in this direction. And especially as you've invested more and more time in your player, in your character, and as you've gained more abilities, gained more items, more map knowledge, more game knowledge, the way that the world will open up to you, we want that to be just such a significant thing that Pantheon imparts to its player base. So I think the way that I like to think about that, honestly, is player sovereignty. It's that sovereignty that players have in how they choose to move around in and engage in the game world. Aside from that, I'd probably also want to add something that highlights our pursuit of class interdependence. That sense of like synergistic group combat and exploration. Those would be the two things I would probably add.
Awesome. So this next question is going to tie sort of into combat. We've talked a lot about combats. Maybe it's a small break from the topic at hand, but I think it plays into what we're talking about. So let me go ahead and fire this up on the screen. But this is from Dougbug, who was in our forums. So Dougbug asked, do you feel the combination of the limited action set, and we've kind of discussed less of a reliance on rotations. Adam's talked about that a lot. And it's going to create, for NPC encounters in PvE, it's more thoughtful. It's not really based around so much. It has time to kill, but that's not the main focus, like how to kill. It's more important. So they were wondering, and we haven't talked a lot about PvP, but they were wondering if this system that sometimes has a little bit longer of a time to kill in certain aspects, or more strategy instead of just quickly hit your rotation to kill something, do you think that it's going to lead to more depth in PvP, where it's not just going to be go up and quickly like pull off your combo and kill somebody, where there's going to be a little bit longer time to kill when PvP is sort of introduced?
I'm not even going to answer, because PvP is just so notoriously not predictable. And that's part of what I love about it. So let me answer this kind of from a different angle first. We actually build and balance combat and its different elements around target TTKs, as opposed to just letting TTK fall where it will. We have goals in mind, for particular level ranges and particular itemization and whatnot. I have to tip my hat to Adam and to Tyler and the work that the two of them have done in really getting that feeling really good. So that said, I expect TTK in PvE to vary wildly, depending on the nature of the encounter, depending on the number of players involved, the level differences, player skill, gear, all that stuff. And there's something, when we think about prestige, those are three really big words for me when it comes to game design, when it comes to MMOs, things like that, are the loop, which is 2 words, but the loop, progression, and prestige. Those 3 things are key. And there's something inherently right about gauging your progression and the sense of progression as a player in how relative TTK decreases as your knowledge and skill and arsenal and potency all increase. So that's there too. But in a PvP sense, like I said, I really don't want to do much predicting, but I do anticipate a lot of these same sentiments to carry over to a degree. One of the main differences that I foresee in PvP engagements in Pantheon is the utilization of what we were just talking about, which is the freedom, the player freedom of movement, and how those kind of special traversals, the ability to maneuver around an environment more freely, either to evade or outrun or ambush other players. I expect to see that being a pretty dynamic part that you won't see in much or in the same ways as you would in PvE. So in that sense, knowing where your target is first, being the first one to get a bead on what a PvP target would be, will be important, because it will allow you, going back to the mention of the LAS, the limited action set, the ability to prime your loadout for what the specific target is that you are going for, as opposed to responding. In PvE, we handle that through the fact that we're anticipating you in situations where there would be, a critical need for survival, where you find yourself in trouble, you're going to be with other players. Or if you're not, you've kind of known what you're biting off before you got into it. Whereas because PvP is so volatile, so unexpected and unpredictable, that LAS, I think, will be challenging in a good way, because there's that new layer, that new dimension that you need to be aware of. But getting the jump on someone will be key, or using those traversal abilities, using that freedom of maneuvering, especially if you're just capable of doing more of that, depending on your itemization, your abilities, whatnot, to get enough distance to choose your ability loadout and your weapon techniques accordingly to what you're about to face. I think we're going to see that being pretty key. And so things like skirmishes, things like utilizing the terrain, and even choosing battlegrounds in a sense, of where you want to do battle, as much as possible, I think it's going to really make a big difference in Pantheon when you factor in all the different traversal things that are at play. And I've talked about before how faction is, I think, also going to play a pretty big role in PvP, because of how deep the faction system is going to go, because of the kind of faction in a game like EverQuest was awesome, and it was also, for the most part, until later expansions at least, pretty one-dimensional, in that you wanted to manage your faction so that you could safely enter and be around certain NPC groups. It wasn't until later that factions started to have much more associated with them, where interacting with certain vendors and access to certain quests and things like that. And so we're wanting to really build on a really robust foundation like that, and just continue to push it further and further. And so by doing that from the outset, utilizing faction and leveraging faction in a PvP sense is going to be a very strategic process, especially when you figure out all the different ways that players can interact or augment or change faction through abilities and through items and things like that. I know I'm at risk of being long-winded, and I know I'm talking about PvP, which is everybody's favorite topic. I do want to reiterate very strongly,
I was going to say
clearly,
this actually.
Pantheon is a PvE focused game. That is what we are building. Will there be opportunities to do very limited PvP on a PvE server? Maybe in certain areas, very opt in. But when we talk about PvP, we are always talking about PvP on PvP servers. That will be completely separate from PvE servers and the PvE population.
Awesome. Well, thanks for giving insight into that. I think I was actually going to ask you to clarify, that PvE first is the way we're going, but it's exciting. It's still exciting where it can be and what that's going to mean for what that experience will look like. Because I think what you said before in the past is that when it's not this system that's just dialed in to be rock, paper, scissors, and it's more natural and it just evolves, sort of like we've talked about with our classes, it's important. So, So let's recap real quick. This isn't maybe perfect, but just for everybody who's been listening, we had our list on the Pantheon Wiki. We're going to update it on the website. But if we said that this was our Pantheon difference now, it would be something along the lines of, first would be fractures now in climate systems, NPC combat tactics, the NPC dispositions and traits, strategic and interdependent combat, perception system, combat and exploration focused itemization, and then player sovereignty. You say that that's a good kind of refresh of it?
I do. I think that's a great list.
Awesome. And I even got sovereignty right there. So that was...
You did. I wasn't quite sure what we were going to hear there. No. What was going to be uttered.
So we got a few more questions to wrap up. I know we're running a little long tonight, but I'm sure nobody's upset about that. Let me pop up our fourth question here. This is actually from Thorndeep, and they asked from our Discord. And you've talked about this. When you started the show tonight, you brought up Pantheon's tenets, right? So the tenets are sort of the foundation of what these differences came from. So the question was, how do they play a role independently of the Pantheon difference in how it differentiates Pantheon from other MMORPGs or games in the genre?
How do the systems we've talked about specifically?
Well, like the tenets themselves, right? So the tenets were kind of those base values, and the tenets then kind of came up with the Pantheon difference. Like, how are those? You kind of hinted at it that those tenets sort of created the path to pave to get the Pantheon difference out there. But if you want to kind of chat about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a difficult question to answer in kind of a recap-y way, because it also assumes that there's a pretty good understanding in the listener of what the tenets are and kind of what they mean. So at risk of like doing a massive deep dive, I don't know if I could restrain myself from going too long on those. I think if I was going to try to recap and draw more of a simplistic connection there, it would be just to highlight a perspective. I think that's important. The tenets of the core beliefs are what guide our decisions. They're what guide our design sense. They're what ultimately allows us to look at something high level, low level, whatever it may be, and make an ultimate call. There is a kind of game that we are wanting to create. There are goals that we have, and the designs and the decisions we make need to support that. When it comes specifically to differentiation and how it will ultimately be different from what else is out there, again, the perspective I want to highlight is simply that it's important to look holistically at the two things you're comparing, whatever they may be, Pantheon and whatever. The reason I believe Pantheon will be firmly differentiated is not because of one system. It's not because there's this really unique spin on this one system that's very different from the way the system is done in all these games. It's the holistic package. It's all of the way that all of it works together to shape your gameplay experience when you play it. The reason I'm confident that Pantheon will stand on its own, that will stand apart and be distinct, is because I have a deep conviction and a deep belief and a certainty that these systems, when they come together, everything we've been discussing, when they come together, that holistic experience will be unlike what you will find elsewhere.
Awesome.
And I would add, in a very good way.
I hope so. Yeah,
it's easy to make something different. It's important to make something different that's good
for a reason. Yeah. We'll jump into another question here. This is also from Discord, and this is from 187. And one of those tenets, that's why I kind of threw it in here, is like player reputation, right? So they ask, what ways will players be able to affect their reputation in meaningful ways? And I'm going to give 187 a heads up that it is towards the end of the show, and this could be another entire episode of Parting the Veil. So, Chris, how would you kind of sum that up in a way that, kind of fits?
Well, this question does do a really good job of bringing us kind of right up to the door of another major tenet of Pantheon, specifically our desire to create a socially driven game. And so the simple answer here is that the more social, the more community driven your game is and the gameplay is, the more primed, I believe, the atmosphere therefore is for players to make meaningful marks on so the server you play on is an online community, essentially. It's an online community of people existing in a world. And the more socially charged your game is, the more community driven your game is, the more natural, organic opportunities you have to make a mark on that community. Conversely, the more fractalized and compartmentalized and disconnected and instanced and all that stuff your game is, the clarity and the contours of your online community blur into non-existence. That you become part of the mass void of just faceless, nameless people. So I think it's key that online community, that strong sense of community is established in these environments, these servers, where you're inhabiting the same world. And I can tell you, in addition to that, what we want to see a return of skilled players becoming known in game for what they have accomplished or their feats in game, not only because they're a well-known streamer, even though we love streamers, and I can't wait, honestly, to see Pantheon being streamed more broadly. I very excited about that, but that's something we want to see. We want to see economies that are very vibrant and healthy, and tradespeople that become known within these economies of a server for their craft, for the time, the attention, what they've invested into that craft. And some of those tradespeople become essentially, famous, very well known for what they can create. We want to see guilds working together. We want to see guild alliances. We want to see guild controversy. We want to see guild rivalries. We want to see guild wars. That's going to be a fun one to kind of unpack, kind of our goals and desires for an evolved, more robust guild war system. We want to see socially driven gameplay, and in that environment, I think there are lots of ways for natural, organic reputation shaping to occur.
Awesome. I love it. A little bit of exciting things for future discussion there too. So before we wrap everything up, we are going to have one more question. But first, I just want to let everyone know we are a crowdfunded game. And your support has always, it does a lot of things for us. It helps us get the game going. For anyone who wants to become a pledge member, you can check that out on pantheonmmo.com. But it's also so much motivation from showing up for streams, retweeting content, sharing with friends and family, whether that's on Twitter, YouTube, anything we're on, checking out our forums, even just checking out the webpage, being a part of our Discord community. All that stuff is extraordinarily important to not just helping us complete the game, with your pledges, but also with your support, which I wish we were able to fully explain what it means to us when we're crunching and things are going and, we're driving and we look up and see these motivational things or this great feedback that, we want to have. So just, again, thank you to the community. We can't do this without you. And it just can't be said enough. So Chris, that was a little bit of I guess you'd say letting people know like how we're going. But the last question here, I absolutely love. And I laughed when you were kind of talking about it with me. So this is from Xanafel, and this was on our forums. And they said, can you give a quick elevator pitch or sales pitch for those who grew up in a fast-paced theme park race to max level MMORPG on why Pantheon is a game they should check out? And what did you say to me right away when it was a quick elevator pitch?
Well, I said, fortunately, I'm not the guy at Visionary Realms that has to craft elevator pitches. And therefore, this won't be super short trying to answer this. I don't have any desire to try to put this into an elevator pitch, even though I understand and I appreciate the question. Yeah. Okay.
They gave you 30 seconds in chat.
To prepare what I'm going to say or to give the whole thing start to finish?
No, go for it.
Oh, wow. I have had to do that a few times over the years, and given enough time, I can sit and distill something down. But this is a really great question, though. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I really enjoy thinking about. I mean, I can tell you right off the bat that, like, when I think about my 12-year-old that is, knee deep into Fortnite and games like that, as much as he loves seeing the things that I do, and as much as he loves, the idea that his dad works on video games and things like that, would he ever really want to play something like Pantheon? I think that age group and teenagers in general, that age bracket, I think is an interesting one. Where my son, I could be wrong, pleasantly surprised, but for those that have really cut their teeth and grown up on that very competitive, fast-paced type of gameplay, I don't know. But even though that sounds maybe like a downer answer, the act as I've thought about this a little bit, I'm actually very encouraged when I think about Pantheon's palatability, and I'll try to break down as best I can why, and it's going to go back to some of those words I mentioned earlier, because the reality is this: I think that people play video games and invest time in playing video games for reasons that don't have anything to do with pace or fast-paced versus slow-paced. I think people play video games because of how well that particular game does those three things I mentioned earlier: how well it establishes its loop, how well it communicates and creates avenues for progression, and what kind of prestige that it awards, what sense of prestige that it awards. And games that do that well, I think, can resonate with just about anybody, regardless of age group, regardless of background, whatever. And I'll give you some examples of why I think that. Take something like a Warzone, for example, or a Modern Warfare 2. Warzone is the most hectic, frantic. You're sliding around on your butt everywhere you go. You're spamming your ground slide. It is not anything that appeals to me personally, but that doesn't matter because there are a ton of people that play it. It's a good game for what it is. But I know people who main Warzone who also love Tarkov, Escape from Tarkov. Escape from Tarkov has become one of my top games of all time. I absolutely love it, and that's not being personally a big first-person shooter person. I've never really been into them that much, but I love Tarkov. But what's fascinating to me is how you can have people that love Warzone and love Tarkov. One of them is frantic, it's fast paced, it's chaotic, it's, just flinch motions everywhere you turn, like it's insane. The other one is slow, it's steady, some would argue a bit clunky. It is just on the total opposite end of the spectrum, and yet they're both incredibly satisfying games to play because they both do those three things really, really well. We are seeing in a new game, or a game that's it hasn't launched yet, but it's starting to kind of become more known. It's called Dark and Darker, which takes all of the things that are amazing about Tarkov and puts it into a medieval fantasy setting. Brilliant move. It's a game I'm excited to try, and it is as slow as you can imagine. The swinging of your weapons, the movement, like it is very slow, but the pacing works well within the context of that game. And again, the loop, the progression, the prestige, it's all there. People who play, some of the fast-paced, the more fast-paced MMOs and action combat MMOs and things like that can love Dark and Darker. So when I think about Pantheon and I think about its, how is it going to resonate with someone who is more used to and typically trends towards faster-paced games, I think the key is ultimately that we do those three things well. If the loop that exists, and the loop simply means like, what am I doing when I log into the game? Is there something attainable? Is there something coherent? Is there something meaningful? Is there some kind of like coherent, congruent thought that I have about what I'm going to do, what I want to do, and how well that loop ultimately starts and progresses and closes itself. The second is the progression, and that is, am I getting a sense of satisfaction as I go through this loop? Am I accomplishing things? Am I accumulating things? Am I acquiring things? Am I becoming more powerful? Am I becoming more capable? And then thirdly is the prestige, which is, at different points throughout that process, am I able to, in a sense, flex myself? Am I able to show off in certain manners what I am capable of doing because of what I've accomplished? And I think, again, if those three things are done well, and then the ultimate capstone on all of that being, is it fun? Do you genuinely have fun? Or are you just deeply invested in one of those three things? Is one of those three things, one of those three hooks in you really hard? I can tell you from personal experience with EverQuest, for example, which, I mean, just to be clear, I recently fired back up and started playing again because I had an itch to get in and play it again. But I'm not having fun when I play it. I am compelled by progression in that game. Progression is what hooks me with EverQuest. My hair's not blowing back, and I'm not sitting there just having the time of my life while I'm meditating and waiting to kill the next, the 100th thing that I'm killing. But what I am compelled by is I have never had a Shadow Knight, a level 70 Shadow Knight. I would really like to attain that. I want to experience what it's like to play that class and achieve that. That gets its hook in me. And that's me, I've played EverQuest for, it is, one of my top time, and will always be one of my favorite games. It inspires so much. So I'm not knocking on the game. It's an amazing game, and still is amazingly. But I'm just highlighting, like, that's so to bring it back around to Pantheon. The goal is, let's accomplish all three. Let's work hard to create a coherent loop that players can coherently understand and get behind whenever they log in to play the game. Let's make sure that there is ample vertical and horizontal paths of progression to make sure that that hook is robust. And let's make sure that there's opportunity for that prestige to be communicated to other players. And with those three things working in harmony, let's make sure the game's fun. Let's make sure that we are paying attention to whether the game is fun to play. We accomplish those things, and to the degree that we accomplish those things, I believe Pantheon is able to resonate with just about anybody.
Very well said. Very well said. I think we Twitch went crazy there for a minute. So unfortunately, for a very short moment there, we cut out. But I think the last thing I'd say, Chris, to add on, if you don't mind, is if we think about the games that we love, we have like a set game type that we all love, and we kind of try games. Then we always find games that we weren't looking for. And sometimes those games are just change everything. And all of a sudden, the genre we look at changes. You know, and it kind of comes down to what you said, the three categories there. But man, that last one, is it fun? At the end of the day, I mean, we all love games that are fun, whether it's in our wheelhouse or we find something new. For myself, you know, you talk about Tarkov. I don't like roguelikes, but man, did I play Hades an unbelievable amount of time. Never really liked roguelikes at all. But when a game's done well, when a game has a great loop, it feels like you're getting better. You feel like you're doing something great. You want to keep playing. And I think you nailed it, because there's just the easy way out is saying pacing or quick in and out or quick gratification. Like, those are just how a lot of those games are designed. So that's why that's happening. It doesn't mean it's the only way. And I think that every one of us can think of those games that we love that we never expected to love. So I just think it's awesome how you sort of put it that way, because there's a lot of people who haven't got to even try a game like we're developing at all, ever. They don't even know what it's like. So being able to introduce that to anybody is just exciting. And I think that, like you said, if that loop, the progression, the prestige, and is it fun? I just don't know where in gaming fun kind of got forgotten. But is it fun? You know, that's what we look for. It's an escape, right? Everything we do every day, when we game, it's a way to take our minds off of some of the crazy and escape. And if we can create a world that does that and it's fun, I think we're going down the right path. So, Chris, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for that 30-second elevator pitch. I love it.
Yeah, I think I kept it under 30 seconds there. Pretty sure.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our conversation tonight. Chris, we went a little bit longer. I don't think that was ever something we didn't anticipate would happen from time to time. But thank you, everybody, for kind of talking through and revisiting the Pantheon Difference with us. Chris, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up tonight?
Just that we are working very hard on getting us to this next pre-alpha session, which is coming up quickly, and also working very hard along with that to really lock in an opportunity for Co to get this stream in. So stay tuned.
Yep. Check out the newsletter next Thursday. Hopefully people will be excited what they read. So, Chris, thank you so much, as always, for spending time with us on Parting the Veil. It's a pleasure to talk about Pantheon with you and talk about what this game is going to be, especially for those out there who may be just discovering us, or even those who followed us for a long time, to just sort of refresh where we're at and provide that feeling to those people who have followed us for so long that we're on the right path. We're not changing. We are evolving, but not changing. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next month. Well, next month for the dev stream. We'll see you in January for Parting the Veil, everybody. So, Chris, thank you.
On run upward, everyone. Thanks so much.